When were you going to tell me? 4 words. No context, no preamble. Just Tobias Kale standing in the middle of his private conference room on the 47th floor, jacket off, sleeves rolled, looking at me like I was a problem he hadn't budgeted for. The Austin skyline was bleeding orange through the windows behind him, and my hands were shaking so badly I pressed them flat against my thighs so he wouldn't see. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. Because what do you say to the man who signs your paychecks? The man you've spent 3 years managing every detail of his life for? When he's just told you, without telling you, that he knows you're carrying his child? And here's the part I didn't understand until much later. He wasn't angry about the baby. He was angry because someone else found out before I told him. Someone dangerous. And by the time I figured out what that meant, it was almost too late. My name is Serafina Cortez. I was 25 years old, and I was the executive secretary to one of the most powerful men in Texas. I'd held that job for 3 years, and in those 3 years, I had never once been late, never missed a detail, never let a crack show. Tobias Kale ran Kale Industries Tech, defense contracts, the kind of company where a single bad quarter makes national news, and I ran him. His calendar, his briefings, his travel, his life. I was good at it. I was the best he'd ever had, and we both knew it. We also both knew what happened in Savannah. 8 months before that conference room confrontation, we'd flown to Savannah, Georgia, for an acquisition deal that fell apart at the last minute. The client backed out over dinner, blindsided the whole team. Tobias doesn't lose well. The ride back to the hotel was silent, the kind of silence that has weight to it. I found him at the hotel bar at midnight, 2 bourbons in, tie loosened, looking more human than I'd ever seen him. I sat down. I should not have sat down. 1 drink turned into 2, 2 turned into a conversation that had nothing to do with work, and that conversation turned into the single biggest mistake of my professional life. Or at least, that's what I told myself for the next 3 months. Because the morning after, we never spoke about it. Not once. We walked back into that Austin office and rebuilt every wall we'd torn down, brick by brick. I convinced myself it didn't happen. He seemed to do the same. We were professionals. We were adults, and everything was fine, until I started throwing up every morning at 7:15, like clockwork. I hid it for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of stepping off the elevator and going straight to the bathroom before anyone could see my face. 3 weeks of headaches I blamed on screen time, and fatigue I blamed on the Melbourne expansion project. My colleague Noemi caught me once, leaning against the restroom sink, pale and sweating. She put her hand on my back and said, "You look like you haven't slept in a week." I told her it was a stomach bug. She looked at me the way people look at you when they know you're lying but love you enough not to push it. The pregnancy test was positive on a Tuesday. I took 3 more, because apparently I thought the first 3 were conspiring against me. All positive. I sat on my bathroom floor for 45 minutes and did math. Not the hopeful kind. The kind where you calculate how fast your entire life can unravel if one person finds out the wrong thing at the wrong time. But the thing about working for Tobias KL, you're never the first to know anything. Not even about yourself. He had a security team. Declan Reese, head of corporate security, quiet guy, ex-military, built like a wall but moved like a shadow. The kind of man who noticed everything and said almost nothing. Tobias had enemies, real ones, not just boardroom competitors. A man named Cresswell Maddox was running a hostile takeover bid from his base in Brisbane, Australia, and had been planting informants inside Kale Industries for months. Maddox had money, patience, and the kind of grudge that doesn't expire. So Tobias had everyone in his orbit monitored. Communications, movements, financial transactions, including mine. He'd seen the pharmacy receipt for prenatal vitamins. He'd flagged the appointment at the OB/GYN clinic on South Congress Avenue. He'd probably known before I'd finished taking the 3rd test. sitting there in his corner office with a file open on his screen, recalculating everything. And he'd sat on it, waited, watched me walk into his office every single day, carry his briefings, manage his schedule, and say nothing. That's the thing about Tobias. He doesn't react, he positions. He waits until he has every variable accounted for, and then he moves. And when he finally called me into that conference room after hours, every word was calculated, except the look on his face. That was real. "When were you going to tell me?" he said again, because I still hadn't answered. I said, "How long have you known?" "That's not what I asked." "No, but it's what matters. You've been watching me. My medical records, my prescriptions, you had Declan pull my pharmacy history. That's what we're doing now?" He didn't deny it. He said, "I have a man in Brisbane who would use you to get to me. I monitor everyone within 2 degrees of don't." I said, "Don't you dare make this about security protocols. You invaded my privacy. This is my body, my decision, my life." The room went quiet. Austin hummed 47 floors below us. And Tobias Kale, a man who had negotiated with senators and stared down hostile boards without blinking, looked at the floor and said, very quietly, "I'm not asking to make your decisions. I'm asking you to let me stand beside them." I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't have a script for it. So I did what I always do when I don't know what to do. I left. I walked out of that conference room and took the elevator down 47 floors and sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, engine off, staring at nothing. But I didn't leave for long, because 2 days later, Declan Reese showed me a file. Cresswell Maddox's people had intercepted internal Kale communications. They knew about the Melbourne expansion timeline. They knew about 3 confidential defense contracts. And this is where my blood went cold. They had started asking questions about Tobias's personal secretary. Not by my title, by my name. I was a target, not because of anything I'd done, but because of who I was to Tobias. And I wasn't even sure yet who that was. So I moved. Tobias had a secure apartment in his building downtown. I fought it. I fought everything back then. It was my default setting, but the logic won. If Maddox's people knew my name, they could find my address, my routine, my vulnerabilities. Declan installed monitoring on my floor. Paloma Soren, Tobias's personal assistant, handled the logistics with the kind of quiet efficiency that made me realize she'd been preparing for this. Tobias set me up with Dr. Leora Tannen, a high-risk OB in Austin who came highly recommended and asked 0 questions about why her new patient arrived with a security detail. The first ultrasound was at 12.5 weeks. Tobias was in the room. I didn't ask him to be. He just appeared, sat in the corner chair like he was attending a board meeting, hands clasped, jaw tight, face completely unreadable. And when the heartbeat filled that small room, this rapid, watery drumming that sounded like the whole world starting over his hand found mine, I didn't pull away. "Doctor." Tannen told me to cut back to 45 hours a week maximum. Regular breaks, reduced stress. I almost laughed out loud. Reduced stress. I was pregnant by my boss, living in his building, surveilled by his security team, and hunted by his business rival from the other side of the planet. Sure. Let me just pencil in some reduced stress between the threat briefings and the prenatal vitamins, Noemi said it best. She brought me tea the next morning, sat on the edge of my desk, and said, "So, the billionaire moved you into his building and assigned you a doctor. That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or a true crime podcast waiting to happen." I loved her for that. She was the only person left in my life who could make me laugh about any of it. If this story is already pulling you in, hit subscribe and like, because Cresswell Maddox was about to make his first real move, and nothing I've told you so far prepared me for it. It landed on a Wednesday morning. I was 16 weeks pregnant, sitting in a department meeting about Q3 projections, when my phone lit up with 4 notifications in a row, then 6. Then my screen wouldn't stop buzzing. I flipped it over. Then I flipped it back, because I could feel Noemi staring at me from across the table. The headline: KAEL CEO's secret affair with secretary. Maddox's people had fed it to 3 Austin outlets and 2 national business publications simultaneously. Coordinated, professional. The framing was surgical: power abuse, questions about impropriety, speculation about whether my position was earned or given. One outlet ran a photo of me entering the building where I live now, thanks to Maddox's own threats. The irony was sickening. They didn't just want to embarrass Tobias. They wanted to destabilize the company during the hostile takeover bid, and they used me as the weapon. The room tilted. I remember standing up from the conference table and my vision going narrow, like looking through a tube. Sounds went muffled. Noemi found me in the bathroom again. Always the bathroom. My office for every crisis. And she grabbed my shoulders and said, "Look at me. We are not letting that man write your story. You hear me? He doesn't get to decide who you are." Tobias's reaction was ice. Not hot anger, the cold kind. The kind that makes people in the room unconsciously take a step back. He pulled Declan and Paloma into his office and said 4 words. "We control this, tonight." They wanted me to stand behind him. That was the original plan. Tobias makes a statement. I'm present but silent, supportive, a visual. I said no. If I stand behind you, every headline tomorrow says you spoke for me. I speak for myself, or I don't show up at all. He looked at me for a long time. Something shifted behind his eyes, not anger, not surprise, recognition. He nodded. Okay. Then we stand together. We stood in front of cameras in the Kale Industries press room that evening. Tobias spoke first, precise, measured. We were in a committed relationship. We were expecting a child. Our personal life had no bearing on the operational integrity of the company. Standard corporate containment language, delivered like the professional he was. Then, I stepped forward. No notes, no teleprompter. I'd been his secretary for 3 years. I had managed every crisis, every failed deal, every impossible deadline this company had thrown at me. I looked at the cameras and said, I have built my career on competence, not proximity. Anyone who questions that is welcome to review my work. And then Tobias did something I genuinely didn't expect. He announced my promotion, Director of Strategic Operations. A role I'd been performing informally for over a year, now formalized, with a title and a team and a seat at the table. He'd been planning it for months, he said. The timing wasn't about the scandal, it was about the work. I don't know if everyone in that room believed that, but I knew it was true. And for the first time since that bathroom floor with 4 pregnancy tests, I felt like I could stand on solid ground. The media narrative turned. Not entirely. These things never fully reverse, but enough. The story became about Maddox's dirty tactics instead of my personal life. His hostile bid started hemorrhaging board support, but Cresswell Maddox was not the kind of man who lost quietly. And he wasn't done with us. The weeks after the press conference were the strangest of my life. The world knew about us now, so there was nothing left to hide, and that should have made things easier. It didn't, because hiding had been our structure. It was the scaffolding that held the professional relationship in place. Without it, we had to figure out what we actually were to each other, and neither of us was good at that conversation. Tobias tried. I'll give him that. He was not a man built for softness. He'd spent his entire adult life turning himself into something hard and efficient, but he tried. He'd read quarterly reports aloud while I lay on the couch with my feet up because Dr. Tannen said my blood pressure was creeping. He burned pasta 3 times in a single week trying to cook dinner. He argued about nursery colors with the intensity of a man negotiating a defense contract. He wanted gray, I wanted green. We compromised on a sage that made us both slightly unhappy, which Noemi said was the definition of a healthy relationship. But underneath all of that, I kept waiting for it to fall apart. That was my real problem, the fear running beneath everything else. Not that Tobias would leave, but that I was disappearing. I had spent 3 years being the most competent person in every room I walked into. Now, no matter what title they gave me, I could feel the reduction happening in people's eyes. Pregnant secretary, the boss's girlfriend. I hated it. I hated that it bothered me, and I hated that I couldn't make it stop, I told him. We were in San Diego for a weekend, the first time we'd left Austin together. Just us. No security escort for once, because Declan had personally cleared the location. Walking along the boardwalk at Pacific Beach, with the sun going down, I said, "Are we doing this because of the baby, or despite it?" He stopped walking, looked at the ocean for a long moment, then at me. I built my whole life on strategy, calculated moves. Everything I've ever done has been part of a plan. You were never part of the plan. And that's exactly why you're the most important thing in it. I wanted to believe that. I chose to believe it. But I also knew that wanting something to be true and it being true are not the same thing, and I wasn't going to let love make me careless. So I kept my old apartment lease. I kept my own bank account. I kept one foot in a life I could walk back to if this one collapsed. A safety net, an exit strategy. He knew. He didn't say anything about it, but he knew. 24 weeks in, I was finally settling into something that felt almost like stability. And then Declan walked into my office, closed the door behind him, and said the 3 words you never want to hear from a head of security. "We have a problem." Maddox's second move wasn't public this time. It was quiet, surgical, and that made it infinitely worse. His operatives had gotten to a junior analyst inside KL Industries, a kid, barely 26, drowning in student debt. They turned him. For weeks, he'd been feeding them access codes for internal systems, client lists, contract terms, the Melbourne expansion financials, and they'd pulled my personnel file. My home addressed the old one, the apartment I'd kept active as my escape plan, Declan said. "Someone visited your old building yesterday, knocked on your neighbor's door, asked about your schedule, your habits, when you come and go." He let that sit in the room for a moment, then, quieter. "It might be reconnaissance. It might be intimidation. Either way, you can't go back there. That address is burned. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and this story isn't even close to over. The escape hatch was gone. The apartment, the separate lease, the bank account with my name on it, all of it was a fantasy I'd been clinging to so I could sleep at night. The fiction that I could walk away clean if things went wrong. The truth was, I was already all in. I had been since the moment I didn't pull my hand away during that ultrasound. And now even the illusion of independence had been ripped away, and I had to sit in that reality and figure out who I was without it. I cried. Not in front of anyone. In the bathroom again. My office for every crisis, every breakdown, every moment I couldn't hold together in public. I cried because I was scared, and because I was furious at myself for being scared. And because I was 25 years old and 6 months pregnant and the apartment I'd kept as proof that I was still my own person wasn't safe anymore, and the man I was falling in love with was the reason it wasn't safe. Then I washed my face, dried my hands, walked across the hall into Tobias's office, and said, "I need access to the full security briefing on Maddox, not the summary you give the board. The actual file. Every threat assessment, every intercept, every name. If I'm on someone's radar, I'm not going to be blind about it." He looked at me, and for the first time in all the months since this started, I didn't see the CEO. I didn't see the protector or the strategist or even the father of my child. I saw a man who was proud of me. He slid a folder across the desk. "It's already got your security clearance on it," he said. "I had Declan update it last week." "Of course you did. You're the director of strategic operations, Serafina. Start operating." That was the moment the last wall came down. Not because he protected me, because he trusted me. There's a difference, and it took me a long time to understand that the second one mattered more. I worked until 34 weeks. Doctor Tannen wanted me to stop at 32, but we negotiated to 34 because I am, in Noemi's words, pathologically incapable of sitting still. The Maddox situation was being handled. Tobias's legal team had filed injunctions, the mole had been found and quietly removed, and the hostile bid was dying a slow, expensive, public death. For the first time in months, I felt like I could focus on the only thing that actually mattered. Ezra came 3 days early. April 8th, 2 in the morning. I woke up to a contraction that felt like someone had wrapped a belt around my lower back and yanked it tight. I shook Tobias awake and said, very calmly, "It's happening." He was dressed and had the car running in 4 minutes flat. The man runs a billion-dollar company. He can mobilize when it counts. 22 hours. That's how long labor lasted. 22 hours of the most relentless, humbling, annihilating pain I have ever experienced. There is nothing glamorous about it. No movie montage, no soft lighting, just fluorescent tubes, sweat-soaked hospital gowns, and a fear so deep it lives in your bones. Tobias held my hand the entire time. He didn't let go. Not once. Not when I screamed. Not when I squeezed hard enough to leave marks. Somewhere around hour 16, when I was exhausted and terrified and convinced something was going wrong, he leaned close and whispered, "You are the strongest person I have ever known, and I have negotiated with heads of state." I wanted to hit him and kiss him at the same time. Ezra Tobias Kale was born on April 11th at 6:43 in the morning, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. When the nurse placed him on my chest, everything, the press conference, the surveillance, Maddox, the arguments, the fear, all of it went silent. Like someone had found the volume dial on the entire world and turned it all the way down. There was just this tiny, furious person with clenched fists and squeezed shut eyes, and he was mine, ours, and nothing else existed. Tobias held him next, and the man who controlled everything, every deal, every room, every outcome for 20 years came completely undone. No sound, just tears running down his face, and his lips pressed against our son's forehead. I watched him, and I stopped wondering. About us, about whether this was real, about whether I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I just stopped. 3 years went fast, not in the way people say to be poetic, literally fast. One day, you're trying to figure out how to swaddle a newborn at 3 in the morning while your billionaire partner Googles how to hold a baby on his phone. And the next you're negotiating with a 3-year-old about why he cannot wear rain boots to a board dinner. I ran strategic operations. Tobias ran the company. We argued about work-life balance the way other couples argue about whose turn it is to do the dishes constantly, passionately, and with no clear winner. We were not a normal couple, and we never pretended to be. We were two stubborn, ambitious, slightly impossible people who had chosen each other under the worst possible circumstances and kept choosing each other every morning after. He proposed on a Tuesday at midnight. I was standing in the kitchen reheating leftover Thai food in a Kale Industries t-shirt. He walked in barefoot, leaned against the counter, and said, "This isn't about convention. This is about choosing you. Every day. Deliberately." I said yes. Then I said, "But I'm keeping my name." He laughed a real laugh, not the boardroom one. I wouldn't expect anything less. Iris Serafina Kael was born on June 23rd, 3 years after Ezra. The delivery was easier this time, 6 hours instead of 22. But the love wasn't easier. It was bigger, heavier, more terrifying in the way that only something you cannot survive losing can be. Ezra met his sister through the hospital window, pressing his small hand flat against the glass with his mouth open in a perfect circle of wonder. And I watched my son meet my daughter and thought, This is the thing I didn't know I was building when I thought everything was falling apart. People ask me sometimes how it all started. They want the fairy tale version, the billionaire boss, The secret pregnancy, the love story with a skyline view. And sure, you can tell it that way if you want. It makes a good headline. But that's not how it felt from the inside. From the inside, it felt like standing in a conference room with shaking hands while the most powerful person you know asks a question you're not ready to answer. It felt like throwing up every morning and smiling through meetings. It felt like seeing your name in a headline you didn't write and deciding, in that exact moment, that nobody else gets to tell your story. It felt like a 22-hour labor, and a hand that never let go, and a tiny fist pressed against your chest at 6:43 in the morning. 3 years ago, I walked into an elevator hiding a secret that terrified me. I thought my life was about to collapse. I was wrong. It was about to begin. If you want more stories like this, the kind that stay with you after the screen goes dark, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.